It's in the Bag by Robert Wright. Anyone who has stayed in a group living setting in college knows that roommates come and go all the time. Dropouts, transfers, and plain old-fashioned flakiness led to that guy who always took your spot on the couch being just another person you used to know. That's why none of us were particularly concerned when Frank was suddenly nowhere to be seen. There were 5 of us staying in the big old farmhouse, which was now a frat-style shared living space. I hadn't known Frank all too well myself. He'd been a quiet dude who mostly came home and stayed in his room. He always did his dishes right after he was done with them, which made the rest of us think of him as more of an adult than we were, even though he was a freshman too. When we actually all discussed the fact that Frank hadn't been seen for a while, he must have been gone for a week already. Our disparate schedules and frequent change-ups meant that we'd often go several days without seeing a certain housemate. No one thought it was particularly odd that Frank wasn't around. I think I remember thinking at one point that he must have gotten a night job. So yeah, when we all kind of noticed that the others had also noticed Frank's absence, we laughed about it. The dude was sticking us for rent. We felt sure of that. But we weren't shocked. Dude had probably decided college wasn't for him after all and moved back home. It happened all the time. But then Joel noticed that Frank hadn't been active on Facebook for a couple of weeks. That was odd. Facebook was the only way we all could really communicate since we were never home at the same time. We had a group chat, and if something came up that the others needed to know about, we'd post it there. Usually these types of messages brought a chorus of KK, cool, word, and your pick of any number of other succinct messages which just amounted to, okay, I heard you, now stop making my phone vibrate, in the end. But Frank hadn't participated in our chat for just about 2 weeks. That was actually pretty strange. Michael had a class with him and said he'd check with the professor the next day to see if Frank had been attending. Those lecture halls were so crowded, it was often not possible to see any friends you might have unless you sought them out. We all parted, agreeing to do what we could to establish contact with the guy. If he had just bailed on the house because he noped out of college half a year in, that was fine. Like I said, it happens. We just wanted to make sure the guy was alive. Well, after our attempts to establish that contact all failed, we decided we'd better get in touch with his family. I reached out to his mom on Facebook and was almost immediately informed that she hadn't heard from her son in some time and thought he was angry with her for some reason. She became disturbed pretty quickly when I told her we hadn't heard from him in at least a couple of weeks, and police were contacted that day. The investigation was pretty open and shut. Unfortunately, there's not much they can do about an adult who decides, of his own free will, to just disappear. Debts are a civil matter, and they didn't have any good leads. Frank was, as we'd always figured, a loner. No close friends, and certainly no girlfriends to speak of. We did see him have one guy over every now and then, but they would just go in Frank's room and hang out for a few hours. Then the guy would leave. Frank never introduced us, and the unspoken rule of the house was, leave my shit alone, and I'll leave your shit alone. Shit in this case extends beyond the physical. But yeah, the cops pretty much told us to pound sand. They said they'd follow up in a couple of weeks to see if anyone had heard from Frank, and asked that we call them immediately if we did hear from him. We all shrugged our shoulders and thanked the officers for their time. Several days went by, and at this point we figured he was in the wind. That or, as Alan suggested in poor taste, he might be dead somewhere, lying in a ditch, throat slit and wallet taken for the full $25 it was likely to contain. They'd get some use out of his library card, maybe. We told Alan he was a dick, and he should keep shit like that to himself. Or better yet, don't think it at all. We asked his mom what she wanted us to do with his stuff. She told us that she didn't have the money to come get it. Frank had been attending on a full-ride scholarship, and asked if we could hang on to it until she came up with the funds. We thought about it, but decided that it wouldn't be fair to ask us to do that. The room being occupied by someone who wasn't paying rent meant we each were going to be out another $200 each month. She understood that and asked if we'd be willing to sell a few of the items so that we could use the money to rent a storage unit for a few months. I thought that was fair, so I agreed to look at his things and pick a few things worth selling. I picked a couple of things: a DSLR camera, a laptop, we backed the data up first, a mini fridge, and a game console. Nothing that we deemed to be crucial and irreplaceable, but valuable enough to make sure the storage unit was covered. As we were moving Frank's things out of the room, I realized that the couch he had in there would be an upgrade from the one we had in the living room currently. The guys all agreed and thought it was only fair, since we were going to all this trouble for a guy who was stiffing us out of hundreds of dollars. So we put our couch into his storage unit and his couch into our living room. Don't get me wrong, the thing was not a nice couch. It was musty, smelled of beer, cigarettes, a hint of piss, and more than a little bit of old food smell. But it was better than ours. After that, the room was empty and we were posting ads around campus, on Craigslist, on Reddit, and just about everywhere else so that we could get that vacancy filled as quickly as possible. We had a reasonable candidate just about a week later. He started moving in that following weekend, and he seemed like a good enough dude. Low-key, not a partier, the kind of guy we wanted. We were in college and having fun, sure, but us guys in that house were of a more serious bent, and were looking to make things happen for ourselves. That's why no one was home that Sunday except for the new guy. His name was Larry, by the way. Tall guy, athletic, good tan, definitely a ladies' man. We'd talked to him about that. We were okay with having girls over, of course, but nothing that became a nuisance. Apparently, he decided to test that theory that very first Sunday. His girlfriend insisted on coming over to see the new place he'd be staying, and from what he later told us, she was all over him as soon as she realized no one else was home, or was going to be, for quite some time. They started making out in his room, and he got up to close the door. She asked why he needed to bother, and he said it was a force of habit or something. She told him that habits are fun to break, and insisted that they take things downstairs. Clothes were shuttled on the way, and the intrepid lovers got down to business. In any case, they proceeded to have sex upon any and all surfaces available to them. We'll skip the details, but the end result is that the couple, well, they found Frank. During an attempted display of power, Larry lifted his girlfriend off of the table they'd been copulating on and carried her over to the couch. He then turned around and plopped down with her on top of him. The force of this plop, as well as their combined weight, was enough to lead them to the gruesome discovery. You see, as their weight came down, they felt something pop and were immediately overcome by an unbearably awful stench. The girl screamed, and Larry jumped up, so overpowered by the odor that he dropped her to the floor. He then turned around and looked at the couch. He told us later that his first instinct was that the couch was a pull-out, and he had broken it somehow. But the smell, oh my fucking God, that smell, made him realize that this was something else entirely. While his girlfriend was vomiting on the floor, Larry pulled back the couch cushions and nearly jumped out of his own skin. Staring back at him from the left end of the couch was the mutilated, rotten face of Frank Hotchkins. Encased in a thick rubber body bag, Frank had apparently been undisturbed by single individuals using the couch for the brief intervals we did while we were between things to do. But the force caused by primal needs of our new house guest had caused the gases from Frank's rotting corpse to rip the bag open. Larry promptly vomited all over himself, his girlfriend, his clothes as he stumbled his way back into them, and the phone as he called 911. He described the scene to us and said that it was burned into his eyes and that he saw it every time he closed them. Frank's face and chest were a disgusting bloody mess. There were lacerations all over him, and one of his eyes had been gouged out. The body was in what was described as an advanced state of decomposition, and the police said they had never seen anything like this before. The rest of us trickled home at random times throughout the night and were astounded to see that there were police surrounding our house, crime scene tape in front of our yard, and a local news van parked on the curb. Needless to say, I was completely fucking shook by this whole thing. I'd sat on that fucking couch. I'd eaten on that couch. I'd fucking jerked off on that couch once. What the fuck? This new lead gave the police a whole new avenue of investigation, and they pretty quickly figured out what had happened. That guy we'd seen Frank have over? That was his heroin dealer, apparently. And Frank had gotten in pretty deep. Toward the end there, he'd been skipping classes, not eating or sleeping, and apparently was also suspected of shoplifting. Anyway, the heroin dealer had come to collect in the middle of the night and ended up killing him during the altercation. He said the body bag was something he found in Frank's room. That made some sense. Frank had an internship at a body harvesting place. The bag was found in the closet while he searched for a blanket. He stuffed the body into the bag, and the bag into the old broken couch, replaced the cushions, and then he just dipped out. Said he figured they'd pin it on one of us. The guy was really smart, you could tell. Now, I will tell you this because I'm sure you're wondering. There was a fair amount of questioning as to how we all missed this. The answer is fairly unsatisfying, but true. Because we were all extremely busy college kids. We were running around and usually not even home most of the time. Alan claimed he'd only sat on that couch once, and it was when we had first brought it down. I'd sat on it a number of times, and as horrifying as it is to say, I definitely thought it was a strange couch. It seemed to be cushioned in a weird, airy kind of way. Yes, I can distinctly recall thinking that. Jesus fucking Christ, right? That said, it never occurred to me that something was wrong. I never felt like I needed to investigate. It was very common to smell weird and often disgusting things in that house. We were 5 guys, after all. And I don't know whether I should be thankful or not, but that bag was the real deal and did a lot to contain that smell. I've never even caught a whiff of something that made me think, that's a dead thing. Personally, I'll spend the rest of my life thankful that I'm not Larry, and I don't think I'll ever feel the same way about sitting on a couch.